All right, so I see that it's starting to record. So welcome everybody to this One World Math Physics seminar. And as I just said, it's been recorded by Daniel Ulci. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to unmute yourself or to write them in the chat. The speaker today is Clotilde Fermagnan-Camerer. She's from University Paris-Est Créteil and not from Technical University as written on the website of the IMP, unless I missed something. Anyway, she's a specialist of semi-classical analysis in linear and nonlinear PDEs stemming from physics, mathematical physics is her specialty. And the topic of today's talk will be nonlinear quantum adiabatic approximation. So please, Clotilde, whenever you're ready.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction. So yes, I'm going to talk about a recent result with Alain Joire, which is published now in Nonlinearity, I think, or soon. I didn't check, in fact. Yeah. So the idea is to talk about nonlinear quantum adiabatic approximation. So I will begin with a bit of introduction, just to motivate why we were interested in this with Alain. So the starting point, of course, is the adiabatic quantum approximation, the one you learn or that you know already, which consists in considering a time-dependent Hamiltonian T, H, I wrote H of T, which depends on the time parameter. So H of T is here a bounded operator on an Hilbert space, math call H. Okay. And we are interested in the slow variations when there are slow variations in time, meaning that we have a time scale epsilon, which will be small. And I can state the equations in two different manners. First, we can say that we look to the equation I d tip c equal h of epsilon tip c, and we can rescale in time. And then we are left with this adiabatic equation, I epsilon d tip psi epsilon equal h of t psi epsilon, with an initial data, psi epsilon of 0 that I call phi of 0. Okay. And the question of the adiabatic theory is to say, okay, let's start from phi 0, that is an eigenvector for h naught. Okay, what can we say about psi epsilon of t when the time evolves? Okay. So the background is to assume that our time-dependent Hamiltonian h of t has a simple eigenvalue that I denote lambda of t, which is isolated from the remainder of the spectrum. So like on the drawing, on the picture, the rest of the spectrum is in the dashed region above lambda of t. Okay, and we assume so that we have a family of eigenvectors phi of t. Now that satisfies the equation h of t phi of t equal lambda of t phi of t, and we assume they are normalized. Okay, so now we start from an initial data which is along phi of 0, and we ask what happens then when the time evolves. And it's standard in the business to do a phase normalization to assume that the derivative of the eigenfunctions phi of t is orthogonal to phi of t, so it's in another eigenspace here since lambda is simple. Okay, and the result of adiabatic theory has been developed by Kato in particular in the 50s, but also I think it's an old question which originates from the 30s. Okay, the result is that up to an order of size epsilon, psi epsilon of t remains in the eigenspace at time t. Okay, in this, so it remains collinear to phi of t up to a phase which takes into account the variation of the eigenvalue. Okay, so this is the usual result, famous result. And the question that we wanted to address with Alain was, well, what happens if this h of t depends non-trivial minor of psi epsilon of t? Okay, if it becomes nonlinear. So the first thing maybe we should discuss is why is it interesting. And the point is that this kind of questions was coming from Gross-Pitayevsky equations. So if this equations appears in the modeling of Bose-Einstein condensates, and in particular, if you look to Bose-Einstein condensate in double well potentials, you have and the modeling of Bose-Einstein condensates led to an equation, a Schrodinger equation. I mean, a Gross-Pitaevsky equation, but it looks like a Schrodinger equation. Okay, I dt psi. You see the standard minus Laplace plus the potential, the external potential here. And then you have a nonlinearity, so cubic nonlinearity, 2 plus 1 means 3, so cubic, okay? Meaning that the potential, in fact, is affected by the function, the wave function. I mean, it depends on the probability of presence of the particle, which sounds reasonable at some sense, okay? And if you look to paper from Milburn and his collaborators from the 97, you can check, you can look for a solution which could be a linear combination of two functions phi L and phi R, which could be the ground states of each of the well which are there. Okay. And this lets the authors to consider a system for the coefficients in this representation of a function, which looks exactly like some systems of equations, which is nonlinear here, v2 square minus v1 square, okay, in v1 plus w2. So something which writes I dt psi of t, but psi of t is just my vector v1, v2 equal h of t and psi of t, okay? So this kind of system which appear in several works of these people interested in Bose-Einstein condensate led to a nonlinear system. And then you can think that, okay, the function R, C, W, which are here, are slowly varying in time. And then you want to know what happens in first approximation for your V1, V2, your pair V1, V2. Okay. So all these considerations that led us to consider a kind of nonlinear setup that we have cooked, more or less, yeah, having in view these examples. Okay. So we assume now that we have a family of Hamiltonian H, which depends on the time, like before, and on the parameter X. So this parameter X is finite dimensional. So x1, x2, xp. Okay, there is p in place. Okay, it's self-adjoint for all tx, and it's I mean there is no consideration of regularity in the dependence of tx. Everything is very nice. Okay, but when I take a fixed tx and a fixed s, then my operator is bounded. Okay, and in fact, our if we think to the nonlinear abatic Schrodinger equation that we had written before, okay, the inference were something like the coordinates of a vector to the power 2 square, the modulus square. Okay, so it's exactly what we are going to do. And we are going to consider the equation I epsilon dt v equal h of t and modulus of v1 square up to modulus of vp square, where v1 and vp are the coordinates of v epsilon in some basis that is fixed from the beginning. Okay, so in some sense, we say we are assuming that the Hamiltonian depend on the time and on the solution, but of a finite rank projection of a solution. Okay, so we just take the norm in some sense, the norm of this, not the norm because they are separated, and as you have seen before, we could have some minus in the input. Okay, so it's not something which is constant; it's something which evolves like it can. Okay, but it's just it's finite rank. Okay, we choose epsilon 1, epsilon e1, ep, p vectors in our Hilbert space H, and we look to this the coordinates of v epsilon along these vectors. Okay, you have questions? No. Okay. So what is our result? So I resume the equation. It's just for being a shorthand for writing this v1 square vp square. We put between a bracket.
Can I ask a question since you solicited one?
Yeah.
So I wanted to know what is known about the existence of solutions to such equations, to such nonlinear equations.
Next slide.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, So I think no, it's not that slide, it's that slide, global solution. Okay, so we will discuss it. So why a global solution? Because in fact, it's you think to Cauchy-Lipschitz, your favorite lecture on Cauchy-Lipschitz theorem, and that's exactly the argument here. You see, well, the H is here. I have assumed that H is bounded. Okay, and in fact, this nonlinearity here is not. I mean, it's just the standard Cauchy-Lipschitz argument for constructing the solution. So why? Because we have norm conservation. Okay, so this is the crucial argument. We have norm conservation because we have assumed that our H of Tx is self-adjoint for any T and any X. So meaning that this norm of the epsilon of T is constant, and then the input here that you put that appear in the X that we put at the X place will not cause trouble. Okay, so we have this global solution for our times, which is in between 0 and 1. Okay, and the next property which is important is the gauge invariance. Yeah, as you have seen, we have put modulus of the coordinates of these p first coordinates, meaning that if I change the v by exponential I theta v, I don't change the Hamiltonian. Okay, so this is really convenient, in particular because it allows to translate, in fact, to modify the Hamiltonian just by a scalar function. So I can, if I have just a nice function Tx, function chi of Tx depending on my two variables T and X. Okay, I can just pass from the equation that I had on the top on V epsilon to an equation with Hamiltonian H of T, which would be T and X plus chi T of X identity. Okay, just by a phases game. Okay, so plugging in front of V epsilon, multiplying it by the exponential of minus I, the integral between 0 of T of chi of u and of this modulus of V epsilon of u du, this function S epsilon now is solution of the equation where I have replaced my original H of Tx by H of Tx plus chi of Tx identity. So you can imagine that this allows, I mean, just you take chi equal the lambda if you have a lambda, which is an eigenfunction in some meaning that we have to precise. We can just switch the Hamiltonian and put the eigenvalues to 0. So this is a trick that we will use. Okay, so this gauge invariance is very crucial. We will use it a lot on the norm conservation too. Okay, so yes, I was speaking of eigenvectors, eigenvalues. What does it mean, in fact? So there is something that we call instantaneous nonlinear eigenvectors, because I think nonlinear eigenvectors is very used already by the community for different things, for things which are different than the one that we want to address. So what we want to consider is a vector omega of t, an element of my Hilbert space, which satisfy h of t omega of t applied to omega of t equal lambda of t omega of t omega of t. So it likes, I mean, it looks like the standard eigenvalue equation, eigenvector eigenvalue equation. Okay, but here it's nonlinear because, of course, the Hamiltonian depends on the function. Yeah. So if I think to the slide what I have just written before, of course, here if chi is a lambda which satisfies something like that, we can play a game to push the eigenvalues to 0. Okay, so what is the assumption we make? So we make an assumption on the Hamiltonian H of Tx, the original function, which is quite like the one that is done for adiabatic setting, meaning that there exists an eigenvalue lambda of Tx, which is simple, and which is simple and which is in the spectrum of H, and it's separated from the rest of the spectrum. Okay? So before the standard setting is we have lambda of t, which is separated. Okay, but here we have lambda of t and x, which is separated, and okay, it's not so this at that level it looks quite reasonable. Okay, and if we make a technical assumption consisting in saying that h doesn't move too much in x, so the variations in the direction x are not too big, because the derivative of h in the direction x are small, but what we measure with a delta. Okay, so if delta is small enough, then we can define these nonlinear instantaneous eigenvectors, so functions of a time. So for small time, okay, we can only prove it for, I mean, we can only, there are situations where there exists only on finite time. Okay, smooth function t maps to omega of t, okay, which is functions valued in the Hilbert space of these normalized functions. We can also ask that they are orthogonal to the derivatives, and this function satisfies the nonlinear eigenvalue eigenvector equation. Okay, so this is a proposition, a result, which comes from, in fact, just a fixed point argument, as we will see later. Okay, but just to fix things, why these things do exist. Okay, so we take an example. We take a function x, a function of x, which is such a called theta. So theta is smooth and whatever you want. Okay, I take p equal 1. So my x is in 1D. Okay, and I consider this this matrix h of tx, which is just cos of 2t theta of x, sine of 2t theta of x, the sine and minus cos. Okay, so this matrix, I mean, I can put anything I want in the theta x, theta of x. What I get is a matrix which has two eigenvalues, difference -1 and +1. Okay, so I have these two eigenvalues separated, and for the eigenvalue 1, an eigenvector is given by this function phi of tx, cos of t theta, sine of t theta. Okay. So if I want to find this one of these instantaneous nonlinear eigenvector, I need to solve the equation omega of t equal phi of t and omega 1 of t squared. Okay. Just because here in the x, I plug the first coordinates of a vector modulus square. So here everything is real valued, so it gives omega 1 squared. Okay, and this equation is very simple. In fact, you see, it means that omega 1 is cosinus of t theta of omega 1 square, and omega 2 is the sine of t theta of omega 1 square. So I just need to find omega 1. So I just need to find a fixed point. Okay, so fixed point, I mean, we are just going to do functional analysis. Okay, functional analysis. I will not say that it's a master because, okay, with master, I'm not sure I can do that, but yeah, maybe we learn it in webmaster, let's say like that. Okay, so functional analysis. I have my function cosinus of t theta omega 1 square, okay, which is, of course, which is between -1 and 1. And then I have my omega 1, y equal omega 1, my line. And of course, it must cross this red curve. Okay, so I have at least one place where it crosses. I can have 3, like here. But if I think that the bump is much smaller, okay, maybe my function cos of t theta omega 1 square is below the blue curve. You see that we can have only 1, and we could have just a double here. So this eigenfunction, this nonlinear eigenvector may disappear. Okay, so here I have, okay, there is a little move here. These things are not perfectly fit. Okay, but nevertheless, there is an intersection, so there exists a nonlinear eigenvector. Okay, and this nonlinear eigenvector lives during a while. Okay, and we will be just interested in following a solution which starts from this nonlinear eigenvector, and to prove that it follows this nonlinear eigenvector during the time where everybody exists. Okay. So this is the theorem. We assume that our Hamiltonian is
again. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But since you have multiple solutions, which one do you pick?
We just pick one. Okay. So we say there exists solution. I'll pick one. So maybe I have a choice. Maybe I have not the choice. But I can pick any of them. Maybe one is existing for all time. Maybe the other one is existing for a small time. And I will just consider the evolution of something which starts from one of them, the time when it does exist. Okay. So,
Thanks.
So I have an existence time. You see, there is a tau. Just here, there is a tau naught. Okay, and this tau naught is okay. We have to be sure that our nonlinear eigenvector exists, and so we are on short time. But short independently of the adiabatic parameter epsilon. You see. Okay, so we take real Hamiltonian for different reasons. Okay. And because, I mean, why not? Okay. And we assume something on the gap. So we assume that the spectrum of this h of tx is simple and finite. Finite means that, in fact, I am more or less just treating matrices. Okay. But we will see later how to generalize this frame to unbounded operators. Okay. And we assume a kind of non-symmetry of the eigenvalue. So if I take h minus lambda, meaning that here I am interested in the eigenvalue 0, and I look to the spectrum of minus h plus lambda, okay, so there is a minus at the other directions in some sense, then the only common value is 0, or the 0 which corresponds to lambda. Okay, so it means that this lambda is taken, for example, the first one. If lambda is the ground state of H, here all the eigenvalues are positive, here they are negative, and so there is the only one in the intersection is 0. Okay. If I take lambda as the biggest one, the same trick appears. But if I take lambda in the middle of the spectrum, I just ask that it's not exactly in the middle, in the sense that they are not two symmetry. There is no symmetry in the spectrum. Okay, so it's a kind of genericity, generic assumption in some sense, and you will see why we need to do that. Okay, and then if we choose delta small enough, there exists a time, tau naught, such that the adiabatic approximation holds, in the sense that the solution of this nonlinear Schrödinger equation with initial data and an instantaneous the nonlinear eigenvector omega of naught remains collinear to this instantaneous nonlinear eigenvector omega of t up to a phasis, which is what we can guess, the minus I, the integral between 0 and t of the action of the integral, the eigenvalue along the solution. Okay, so no surprise. Okay, but a lot of constraints to deal with a nonlinear thing. Okay, this not too much symmetry, real valued. Okay, simple. The spectrum is simple, so okay, lot of things just to get the same kind of result than in the linear case. Good. So a few remarks and comments. First, something about the energy of such a solution. So in fact, what we are claiming is that there exist some kind of special solutions which are adiabatic. Okay, you can think it's in some sense it looks like these results in the nonlinear PDEs when you say the existence of soliton, special solution in this in the full range of solutions. There are special ones, and these solutions. This adiabatic solution, in some sense, they have a nice property, which is that their energy is controlled by the nonlinear eigenvalue that we know. Okay, so if we think, so I want to be more precise. What I mean by energy of a solution, it's just that I compute u epsilon time a against the action of the Hamiltonian, so the nonlinear Hamiltonian against you, okay? And if you look to what you can say about that, you can say very few. More or less what you can only say that this thing is bounded between minus the sup of the action of h of tx times the initial data, the norm of initial data, and the energy is bounded above by the plus the sup, this sup, okay? Meaning that it can oscillate on order 1. Well, I mean, the range of approximation of the energy here is very large, okay? But if you take the adiabatic solution with the epsilon of t, the things are more under control. You know exactly how is the energy because it's lambda of t and omega of t up to epsilon in time. Okay, meaning that the oscillations are the localization of the energy is more precise. Okay, so this solutions looks interesting for this reason. Okay. So I was saying that, yes, I am playing with matrix. So we are just doing functional analysis on matrix, and maybe you are a little bit frustrated. Okay. So let's
I have a question.
Yeah.
Why did you assume that the Hamiltonian is real? Did it matter?
I think it matters. Maybe Alain can say can answer also a bit, because I mean.
Yeah, spectral difference.
Yeah, for the spectrum, you are right, exactly. Because okay, I'm going to spoil the series. You know, after at some point you want to make an approximation on a nonlinear equation, so you are going to look to the linearized operator associated with this special solution, and then look to when you linearize your equation, you arrive in you get non-self-adjoint operator, and then these questions of on the spectrum will become very, very important. We will have, I mean, it will be interesting. It will be really important for us. It will guarantee that our operator, the linearized operator, is real valued in particular. Yeah. So unbounded extension. So in the unbounded extension, we managed to prove something, but with somehow less general assumptions. In particular, we assume that the h of tx is something fixed, h naught, plus a perturbation. Okay. Before we were just saying that h of tx depends on x, and okay, but it varies slowly in x. Okay. Here we say it's something fixed plus a perturbation, but this w is really a perturbation because it's bounded. It's smaller in norm. You know, the norm of the w is a self-adjoint bounded operator with a norm which is smaller than delta, and so it is for its derivatives. Okay, so it's not exactly the same than the framework we had before. Okay, and we assume so the perturbation is bounded, but the h naught is self-adjoint, okay, unbounded with a domain that we call D here. And we also need some assumption on the growth of the, I mean, we need, I don't know if we really need, but we managed to prove something in the case where the gap between the eigenvalues of h naught was growing. Okay, and this was convenient because if since the w is just a small perturbation, this assumption is also true for the full Hamiltonian h of tx. Okay, so we need more information if we want to treat unbounded case. Okay, then we have the same statement with this generated gap hypothesis on the eigenvalues. Okay, now they are infinite, and we need to say something about that. Okay. So at that point, you may, I mean, if you are in PDEs, you begin to think, okay, then my h naught, I can take my favorite Schrödinger operator, Gross-Pitayevsky, you see. So the point is that yes, we can, but on the other hand, we are not going to do what people do usually, people, and I am among them, when doing PDEs. I mean, and that was the main reason why we decided to try to do something with Alain, is that usually in the PDE setting, okay, usually, I mean, lot of people. So Carl and his collaborators, among them I am, Sparber, Gang, and Harry, for example, for a series of works of people who are interested in the semi-classical nonlinear Schrödinger equation. So I epsilon d type psi equal minus epsilon square over 2, the Laplace of psi plus a potential, which can be matrix valued if I have a systems. And then a nonlinearity, epsilon to the power alpha, and a cubic nonlinearity. So in fact, in all these works, there are various works depending on the form of a nonlinearity. So here you can take just the cubic ones, but you can also take something like the R3 equation, where the nonlinear, when the potential, which depends on the wave function, is given by a convolution between functions more or less rough that you convolve with psi square. Okay, so this is convolution with Laplace, and you get psi square. So it is the worst in some sense. And if you take something, some smooth kernel, you have an R3 equation with a nonlinearity, which is less crude. Okay, and when people address this question, in fact, they are not exactly the same setting than us, because everything is mixed. You see, there is this epsilon. You are in semi-classical approximation, so you can dream of doing some adiabatic result. But the coupling, the nonlinear coupling, it depends again in epsilon. Okay, and there is no delta in the problem I want to address today. We have a delta and an epsilon. The epsilon is for measuring the adiabaticity, and the delta is for measuring the size of the perturbation of the nonlinearity in some sense. And here it's the same epsilon which do both, meaning that most of the results are just for alphas larger than some critical value, meaning that it's a perturbation. So it's a weak nonlinearity. Okay, weak nonlinearity means that this weakness you can change the problems just by assuming that we have weak small data in some Sobolev norm, and then here you can put 1. Okay, so it's very specific regimes, and much of the results in this setting is concerned with special initial data, so wave packets, for example. So you can prove that a wave packet propagate, you can prove nonlinear propagation of wave packets, and it's not just perturbation of the linear equation, because the nonlinearity affects the way the wave packet evolves. Okay, so you have nonlinear profiles for the wave packets, for the asymptotic wave packet, or you have interaction between the trajectories when you make a superposition. So you have all a range of results presenting, I mean, I like them a lot, of course, presenting what happens in this setting, but this setting is not the same than the one we address with Alain, and the result cannot transfer to one to the other. Okay, and in some sense, okay, yeah, I won't really here the adiabatic, the semi-classical parameter affects the nonlinearity, while with Alain we wanted to have to dissociate the thing. Okay, so another work which should be closer to the one with Alain is this work with Rémi Carl about nonlinear, I mean, nonlinear, non-adiabatic transitions, because we prove some kind of nonlinear Landau-Zener formula. Okay, so this is closer to the setting we are addressing today, because it's a time-dependent system. There is just an Hilbert space H. G is an operator on H. Okay, and we look to a system of two equations which look like the Landau-Zener model problem, because usually, okay, here you have nothing, that you take T, Z star minus T, and this is the standard Landau-Zener model for transitions. Okay, and we perturb it. We perturb it with a plus here and a minus here, because anything that you put which is like collinear to identity we can get rid of thanks to a phasis argument. Okay, so the very bad guy in some sense is to have plus something minus something, and here again we add V delta here. But the difference with what we did before is that there is no semi-classical parameter, and no adiabatic parameter epsilon here, meaning that we are interested in the limit when t goes to plus infinity. So t switch to s, just the s here has not the same status than the t in the result that I presented before, because the s here goes to infinity. Okay. And being adiabatic in some sense means to be close to when s goes to minus infinity, to be close to an eigenvector for this matrix. So if you compute the eigenvalues and the eigenvectors, just putting a g, which is something real valued, for example, the eigenvalues are just the square root of t plus delta f square plus zz square. Okay. So if you write the asymptotic of these eigenvalues when s goes to minus infinity or plus infinity, you are left with something which looks, when you integrate it, which is exactly like the phases here. So is delta f, so this is just this delta f at when you integrate it between 0 and s, it gives s. And then this function lambda of s and gg star, which is the s square over 2, which is reminiscent from the square root of s square and the log, because yeah, there is a 1 over s at some point. Okay, so this initial data, this scattering data at minus infinity, is something which is along one eigenvector for one mod. And when you let it evolve, when you pass to plus infinity, we prove that it will, okay, again, it will have these two phases, these two components, the first mod, the other mod, but there happens some transitions between the mods, because the omega 1, omega 2 are non-zero. I mean, the omega 1 is something exponential minus p over 2 gg star nu 0. So, okay, it depends if, okay, yeah, but it is what it is. And omega 2 is something else. So you have scattering between minus infinity and plus infinity, and the mods are not preserved. Okay. So I'm not saying that this is showing that, I mean, that the idea, okay, I'm not saying, I don't know what I am saying. Better to say what I'm saying, but when I am not saying what I am not saying. What I am saying is that for this system, we know that there are non-adiabatic regime, non-linear, non-adiabatic regime in which things don't follow the eigenvector, okay, at leading order, but the scaling in time is different here. Okay, so we have to. This is just it's a little bit impressionist. Okay. So maybe I should discuss the ideas of the proof of our theorem. Like I said, it's a funny game of functional analysis. So in fact, there is 3 steps in some sense. First, we want to exhibit some instantaneous nonlinear eigenvector with a nonlinear eigenvalue, just to work with it, okay? And then when we have this omega of t, we take an initial data which is in omega of 0, and we are going to linearize the equations just to analyze how is the psi epsilon of t minus omega of t. Okay, and we'll write, I mean, it's not very original. We write the equation satisfied by this thing that we want to show that it's small. Okay. And so we are going to do that. And then we will see that we arrive with a non-self-adjoint operator. So, okay, the linearized system is not self-adjoint. And then we have to do some non-self-adjoint adiabatic theory to get rid of the small terms. So, okay, between comma, we say that we are just doing integration by parts and control of remainders. But, you know, it's integration by parts a la Cato. And so it's a very nice one. Okay. So step 1, the nonlinear eigenvector. Why do they exist? It was a question. No, it was not the question, but okay. So we assume. So in this, okay, I just explain what I do when H is bounded. Okay. So we know the setting is that we know that there exists lambda of tx, which is a simple eigenvalue of sigma h of tx, and we want to prove that there exists a phi such h phi. No, we know that there exists phi such that h phi equal lambda phi, and we want to find an omega of t, for which this solution holds when I replace the x by the omega of t. Okay. So finding someone fixed point theorem, so it's Chaudhuri fixed point theorem here. And so we work in the ball of vector, which are the unit ball in H, in fact. And we consider the map, which sent V or on phi of this capital between V. Okay, we fix the T. We show that for all T, there exists some. Okay. And so this, the image of a ball by this map S is included in a compact. Okay. And so we have a fixed point for this map. And then the regularity comes from the implicit function theorem for small delta. Okay. So now that we have this eigenvector, we begin to do PDEs. So the first thing that we do is to use this argument, this gauge invariance, which allows to restrict to the case where lambda is 0. Okay. So this is very convenient. We have replaced our h by h minus lambda judged by a change of phase. Okay. And the vector omega that we have constructed now, it satisfies the h of t and omega of t applied to omega of t equals 0. Okay. And of course, we have managed so that t is orthogonal to its derivative. Okay. So now we consider delta of t, which is our solution, v epsilon of t minus omega of t, our eigenvector, nonlinear eigenvector. And we know that at time 0, delta is 0. We write the equation satisfied by this delta. So I epsilon delta dot equal h of t, v epsilon of t minus I epsilon omega dot. Okay. And we want to see only things in terms of omega and delta. So of course we plug into v epsilon of t omega plus delta. So here in the inside at the between the brackets, okay, we make a Taylor expansion. Okay. And the terms in omega of t disappear just because omega of t is in the kernel of h of t omega of t. Okay. If there is a parenthesis. Yeah, okay, here the brackets in the parentheses are confused. Okay. So at the end, what you get when you differentiate this modulus of square, you see that something like delta G bar is appearing. Okay, so it's in fact you have a system which is which mixed delta and delta bar. So what we do is just to rewrite it as a bigger system on delta and delta bar. Okay, and at that point we use that h equal h bar. It would be convenient. Okay. This system writes as follows. So I epsilon delta dot bar equal a source term minus I epsilon omega dot, because omega is real valued. Okay. And this source term is in the kernel of h of t and omega t. Okay. And then we have the operator, the linear right operator along omega, f of t, and then over terms which are for the 2 in delta. But since delta of 0 is 0, we can hope that they will not, we will say that they don't matter. Okay, perturbation equivalent. So how is this f? So this f on the diagonal is just h and minus h, so something self-adjoint that we call f naught. Okay, f naught of t equal f naught of t star. Okay, with a spectrum which is just the union of the spectrum of h and the spectrum minus the spectrum of h, okay, because of this game on the diagonal. Okay, so you see why this symmetry assumption, from where this symmetry assumption are coming. Okay, it's for studying this linearized operator that we will need to have some nice assumptions on the spectrum. Okay, and then so this is the f naught is just the self-adjoint part of f of t, and then there is a perturbation g of t which comes from from the Taylor formula that we have written. Okay, so this G of t, we can write it just like finite rank perturbation. Yeah. Okay. So finite rank because it's just a projector. So it's worthwhile to go backwards and just see how it works. Okay, what we see here is you see the delta G, but only with G between 1 and P. Okay, so it's finite rank in delta and in delta bar. Okay. And besides, there is, it's just, you just see the derivative, dxg of h omega. So we write it by introducing the vectors mu g, which are just the part in h, which takes into account the derivative in h. And then if you write nu g equal omega g, e being the basis of the Hilbert space that we have used, omega g, e, what you get is that G of t writes very easily as, okay, a finite rank perturbation of the F naught, but not self-adjoint. Okay. So what we are going to use is that it's a perturbation. It's a small, G is small in norm, it's a bounded perturbation, very nice. Okay, and that we are going to use is that this omega dot is in the orthogonal of a kernel of F, okay, of F naught. Yeah, so what we are going to do is perturbation theory, saying that we are perturbating the F naught. Okay, it's not self-adjoint, but we hope we can manage. And then this vector that is here, which is, I mean, it's a source term, but you see, there is an epsilon in front of it, but the epsilon is exactly also between the derivatives in time there. So it's not a small source term, but it's a source term which is orthogonal to the kernel of F. Okay, so we are going to do non-self-adjoint adiabatic approximation. And the first thing to do is to study the spectrum of f of t. Okay, so what we have assumed is that we have these assumptions, if you remember, on the spectrum of H. We see just that the intersection of the spectrum of H and of minus H is there is just 0. Okay, and and we have also assumed that h of tx has capital N simple eigenvalues, since we are in the matrix case. Okay. And this is enough to show that for delta small enough, in fact, the spectrum of f of t will consist, so with the perturbation, will consist in two, so here I have 2 n prime plus 1, okay, eigenvalues. Okay, coming from perturbation of the one of h or of the one of minus h, okay, which are all simple because they don't meet the two parts of the spectrum, okay, except the one in the middle, which is of multiplicity 2, okay, and with symmetry, in fact. Okay, so this means that this f of t, in fact, is just it's simple. You can just write it as the sum of this lambda g of t, pg of t, okay, where pg of t are projectors, non-orthogonal, but projectors. Okay. So this is a consequence of Aronson-Lewinstein theory. Okay. Then we apply Kato approach of adiabatic linear approximation. So just mimicking, I mean, what is done for self-adjoint operators. We consider the semi-group associated with f of t that we call t epsilon of ts. Okay, so for I epsilon dt, t epsilon of ts equal f of t, t epsilon of ts, and t epsilon of ss is identity. And we introduce the intertwining operators w of t that solves w dot equal the sum of p dot g pg w of t. Okay, this is really Kato approach. Okay, then we have an approximate evolution operator v epsilon of ts, which commutes with the projectors and which is simply W of t, Pg of 0, then you take the evolution of eigenvalue, W minus 1 of S. Okay, and you prove that this T epsilon of Ts approach the V epsilon of Ts up to some term of order epsilon. And it is this operator, this approximate evolution operator, V epsilon of Ts, that we are going to use. So what we are going to do is just to write Duhamel's formula. Okay, so delta t bar is equal to the integral to minus the integral between 0 to t of T epsilon of Ts time this omega dot, okay, plus the evolution of the remainder that we are going to forget, okay. And in the treatment of the source term, we replace the T epsilon by the V epsilon, and because the V epsilon is commuting with the eigenprojector, yeah, we just, this term disappear. Okay, okay. This term is order epsilon. And then to control the remainder, we just have to take into account the smallness of this the term generated by the source term. So A epsilon, the sup of delta is smaller than A epsilon, plus some very rough estimate B tau, the sup of delta square over epsilon. And that's guarantee that the sup of delta t is smaller than something times epsilon. Okay, and we are done, since it means that our solution, V epsilon of t, is approximated by omega of t up to a term of order epsilon. Okay, so a word of conclusion. I think I'm more or less on time. So there exist adiabatic solutions in a non-linear setting. Okay, but this does exist. I tend to think this solution like soliton style solutions. Okay, and I think the interesting questions for this about this these solutions would be to see their stability close to these bifurcation points when the instantaneous linear eigenvectors stop to exist. Okay, what happens then after? And another question which would be interesting is to see if there is a superposition, but I guess we need very special nonlinearities to address these questions. Okay. Maybe weak nonlinearities. Okay, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Clotilde. So I guess we have a little time for some questions. So please, you can use either the chat or just unmute yourself.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What is the Aronsheim-Weinstein theory?
So I think it's just so the specialist is Alain. I learned this from Alain. I mean, that is just perturbation theory, but in a non-self-adjoint setting. Is it correct to say like that? Or...
Perturbation theory for finite rank operators. I mean, finite rank perturbation. Yeah. You just have the determinant. You want to call you may want to call that the Krein formula for the resolvent.
Yeah, in fact, you're right. You study the determinant. You look exactly. It was, I mean, how to say.
So I mean, well, what is the conclusion of that theory?
I mean, the conclusion of this theory. What do you mean? The point is that if I perturb, I mean, what I can say is that if I take this lemma is true. Yeah, this is my conclusion. Okay, if I manage so that the spectrum, I mean, the spectrum of this operator, my big operator f of t is simple, and if we perturb, there is no, everybody is living in his little neighborhood, and there is enough room. So that's
but this is the usual perturbation theory without any finite rank assumption. That's
yeah, but here it's not self-adjoint. So you see, it could move up in the complex. Okay, the eigenvalue. Then you need to control that they don't move too far. Yeah, and that's why we needed to be more careful. So maybe you think it's standard perturbation theory. You think, Jan?
Well, the unperturbed operator is self-adjoint, is it? Or
the unperturbed?
Only the perturbation is self-adjoint. So I would imagine that the most standard arguments should imply that the spectrum moves just a little.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, it's not. We have cooked the assumption so that so that there is. We are sure that it works at that level. So.
Perturbation theory is problematic if you perturb a non-self-adjoint operator.
Yeah.
Then this could be. But if the unperturbed operator is self-adjoint, then I don't see any problem.
Yeah, I guess you are right.
Well, maybe I can just say something about that. There is one point that Clotilde didn't talk about. There is a way, a situation we can deal with this, which is the case where the F naught, which appears on the slide here, has essential spectrum. It might be, you might have projectors which are infinite dimensional. So the perturbation might, take out infinitely many eigenvalues out of these infinite degenerate subspaces. But since we have finite rank perturbation, this does not appear, and we can compute or at least say something about the location of the finitely many eigenvalues we get by making use of this Weinstein-Aron-Sachs determinant. It's in that sense that we use this theory, if you wish.
Yeah, maybe I should not have put it here because here we are just a matrix. We have just matrix.
Yeah, for the matrix case, it's a
yeah, that's right. I wanted to look clever, but you are still recording. No, I mean, okay. Yeah, I see what you mean.
So can I ask a question? I have a very sort of naive question. Once you know the existence of a solution, that solution happens to satisfy the Schrodinger equation with a time-dependent Hamiltonian. Yeah. Why doesn't just the standard adiabatic theory apply to that special time-dependent Hamiltonian to give you a conclusion?
Because when you do the standard adiabatic theory, I mean, you consider your where is it? Just at the beginning, you consider your operator. I mean, your operator is fixed, okay? And here the operator is affected by the depends on the solution. So you cannot speak.
Well, that's that. I understand. I don't think I phrased my question terribly well. Can you actually go to the next slide?
Yeah.
I think.
This one?
No, wait. Where was it?
Main result.
There you go. Yeah. So what I'm saying is, once you know that the solution exists, so you've found the Hamiltonian which is affected by the solution.
You mean the omega of t? When I know. But there is two things. There exists this omega of t, which is the instantaneous eigenvector, and this fixes the Hamiltonian to h of t and omega of t. But then when I consider this equation with v0, which is omega of 0, my Hamiltonian is changing. It's not the Hamiltonian related with omega of t. Okay. So,
okay. Yeah.
So.
I see. Yeah. That was true.
Maybe the basic thing is that when you have two eigenvectors which are orthogonal at time 0, two instantaneous eigenvectors. When they evolve by Hamiltonian which are different. Okay, so maybe they can be collinear after that. So because just I write I put the equation for the this nonlinear eigenvectors. You see, you start with omega 1 of 0, omega 2 of 0, which are orthogonal. Okay, and then at the beginning, but even at the beginning, you don't have the same Hamiltonian. The Hamiltonian is depending on the instantaneous eigenvector. So you cannot say that, okay, yes, I'm going to look what happens on the other modes, because the modes depends on your eigenvector. So
yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I that.
So it's
I understand.
Yeah. So in fact, in the result I have presented on the nonlinear on Landau-Zener type result, in fact, the eigenvectors are very close to the unperturbed one, and then you have a world which is you have a world which is not moving, you know, and then you look to how things are in this basis. But as soon as you decide that you are completely nonlinear, then the world is moving. Your eigenspace are moving each time, and they are disconnected in some sense. What was at the beginning becomes something else after.
Okay, do we have more questions or comments?